I opened the terrace door and found my daughter crouched in the snow, her shoulders shaking, while inside her in-laws warmed themselves by the fireplace and pretended the wind and she didn't exist. My heart didn't break. It steadied as I wrapped my coat around her and noted the time the faces in the glass, the door that had closed us out. That night I chose silence as my weapon. I sheltered her first, then began collecting what cannot be argued with names, dates, and proof that remembers more faithfully than people do. This was only the first crack in their glass house, and by morning they would learn a quiet mother is not a weak one. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The message came through just after the sun had gone down, when the lights in my kitchen were still bright enough to fight off the shadows creeping in from the yard. My phone buzzed on the counter and I glanced at it with the same casual habit I had done thousands of times. But the words on the screen stopped me in my tracks. Family event this weekend. Attendance limited. Please do not come. No greeting. No little heart at the end. No love you, Mom. Just a flat, cold line that could have come from an office administrator or a stranger. My daughter's number glowed at the top of the screen, but the message didn't feel like hers. It read like something scrubbed clean of warmth, as though she had been instructed which words to type and which ones to leave out. My thumb hovered over the screen, scrolling back to old conversations, rereading the pet names and gentle emojis she always added. Tonight, the absence of those things felt louder than any insult. I stood there longer than I should have, the phone heavy in my hand. The house was silent save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I read the text again, each word colder the second time. It was as if someone had pressed delete on the bond we'd built over years of laughter arguments, reconciliations, and late-night calls. Something wasn't right. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table staring at the message. My mind reached back to her last birthday just a month ago, when she had sent me a long string of messages filled with exclamation points and silly nicknames only she ever used for me. She had called me Mama Bear and even sent an old photo of us making cookies in my tiny Houston kitchen when she was just a girl. That was her, warm, unfiltered, alive. The contrast between then and now struck me hard. This wasn't just a change in tone, it was a change in spirit. I could almost hear someone else standing behind her dictating the words. The distance in the message felt manufactured, like she'd been pushed into writing it under someone's watchful eye. My instincts told me this wasn't just hurt feelings or a spat. It was pressure. It was fear. I set the phone down, then picked it up again, unable to let it rest. The sterile text gnawed at me, whispering that my daughter was slipping further into a place where my reach might not matter anymore. And that thought chilled me deeper than the winter air outside. I pressed call. The line rang longer than it should have, until finally a faint click answered me. Mom. Her voice was barely there, a fragile thread that seemed to stretch thin across miles. It was trembling the way she used to sound when she had nightmares as a child and would call me from her room, too scared to come out into the dark hallway. Mary Belle, are you all right? That message, I started, but I barely got the words out. I can't talk right now. She whispered the syllables breaking apart. Please. Just. And then nothing. Silence. The line went dead so abruptly that the flat tone in my ear felt like a slap. I stared at the phone, stunned, willing it to light up again, to tell me it had been a dropped call or a mistake. But no. The silence stretched, filling the kitchen until it felt suffocating. I held the phone tighter, replaying the sound of her trembling voice. She had wanted to tell me something. She had needed to tell me something. And someone or something had stopped her. I didn't cry. I didn't allow myself to crumble into panic the way a younger version of me might have. Instead, I did what 60 years of living had taught me to do. I paid attention. I noted the exact time of the call, the way her words had broken, the way the line cut off without explanation. My anger coiled inward, quiet but sharp as I imagined her sitting somewhere not far from her husband, who could silence her with just a glance. I made a mental list time tone, abrupt ending. Each detail was a thread, and I knew I would pull at them until the truth unraveled. I had lived long enough to understand that outbursts rarely save anyone, but quiet observation can be the sharpest weapon in the room. So I sat in that silence, not because I was weak, but because I was gathering strength. My daughter might be under someone's control, but I would not rush headlong and give them reason to cut me off completely. I needed clarity, I needed proof, and I needed to be ready. The house had grown still by the time I finally set the phone down. My heart was beating hard, but my face remained calm. I looked at the familiar walls of my kitchen, the pictures of Maribel still hanging there from brighter years, and I knew I couldn't let this pass as just another family slight. I pulled open the closet door and glanced at the small suitcase I kept ready for emergencies, old habit born from years of being both mother and father when life required it. My decision was already made. I would not wait for another hollow text or another broken call. The phone still sat on the table, black screen facing upward, a silent witness to the moment my quiet resolve turned into action. Whatever waited ahead, I would face it. For her. For me. I left Houston before the sun, sliding into a half-empty plane with a carry-on and a knot in my chest. The terminal air had smelled of coffee and disinfectant. The gate agent's voice was soft, like she was guarding a secret for me. All the way up the jetway, I kept touching my phone, rereading the text that wasn't my daughter speaking. At 30,000 feet, the world went quiet except for the hush of engines and the rustle of strangers adjusting blankets. I watched the map creep northeast, a blue line drawing me toward cold. I told myself this trip was precaution, not panic. Call it a mother's audit check. The doors read, the faces confirm the heartbeat behind a voice cut short. When the captain announced Boston, his words carried winter. Ice drawled over the runway. Clouds opened to city slate and steel. By landing, I had decided one thing: I would accept no explanations delivered by anyone but my child. The plane kissed the gate, and cold moved in like a verdict. In Houston, winter is a rumor. Here it had teeth. I cinched my scarf, steadied my hands, and promised myself I would not dramatize. If the message had been normal, I'd be home making soup. It wasn't. Not today? No. Now. By late morning, a cab carried me along a river that wore ice like cracked glass. Brownstones gave way to hedges trimmed into obedience, then to a lane where snowbanks leaned into iron fencing. The Whitmore place sat back from the road, a long Georgian face with too many windows, every one of them watching. I asked the driver to wait. He looked at the house and decided to circle instead. I pulled my gloves tight and retrieved the small box I'd brought, a locket my mother had worn meant for my daughter when the right day came. I had imagined tea by a modest fire, a quiet talk, and the weight of that locket settling into her palm like a promise. Instead, the front steps looked like a landing for a parade of boots. Someone had salted stone to a bright crust that squeaked under my boots. The columns at door were perfect, but they felt like arms crossed. A wreath hung without whimsy, no ribbon askew, no soft welcome at all. I stood there, the box tucked into my coat pocket, and listened. From inside came a polite hum, a piano low talk, that cushiony laughter people have when everything is easy. I pressed the bell and straightened now. Hope is stubborn. I let it lift its head again. The bell answered me with a silver chime that vanished into the house. I stood straight, chin lifted, the way my mother used to when she had to ask for what should have been freely given. Behind the frosted sidelights, a figure moved small shoulders, hair tucked up the familiar tilt of a head that always found me in a crowd. It was my daughter. Her outline hovered, then pressed closer until her breath brushed pale onto the glass. I touched my palm to the panel as if I could warm her hand through wood and paint. Then a shadow shouldered into view. A larger shape, broad and certain, cut across her and took the space where she had been. The knob turned, but only an inch. a chain caught. A man's voice did not travel to me. Instead, another sound arrived, the soft whisk of fabric, the scrape of a shoe pivoting on marble, the hush of a hand lowered in command. Maribel's silhouette recoiled, and the curtain drew shut, as if it were ashamed. I stood there with the locket in my pocket and the years in my throat. Now there was a chain between us, and the chain did not care. I knocked once more, calmer than I felt. The glass held its fog where she had stood, a ghostly oval fading. It is a habit of women like me to record what cannot be kept. The house withheld her from me. Manners, orders firm. The chain stayed latched. A young man filled the space with a trained smile. "Good afternoon," he said. "May I help you? I'm here to see my daughter," I answered. She was just at the door. "Today is by invitation, ma'am. We're working from a guest list." He didn't show it. "Please tell Mortimer Whitmore that Lorraine is here from Houston." The name jarred him. He recovered fast. One moment. The door eased shut to the chain. Sound pressed through a piano, a clink, low talk, the settled ease of people at home. When he returned, his face was smooth as marble. "Mr. Whitmore isn't available," he said, "and your name is not on the list." I pictured a hand on my daughter's elbow steering her away. I kept my voice low. "Please tell whoever is advising you that I understand." Relief flitted across him. He waited for me to protest. I didn't. I nodded so he could close the door without guilt. "Thank you," I said, and memorized the time, the tone, the exact phrasing for the record I keep. I stepped back from the chain and let the wood seal itself. Cold laid a steady hand along my jaw. The cab waited across the road, engine low. I tucked the locket deeper into my coat and counted to 5. Inventory, a chain, a trained voice, a script about lists, a breath on glass, a larger shadow. The wreath was perfect. The salt left chalky crescents. A heel had carved a half moon in the snow. People mistake silence for retreat. They do not know the arithmetic of single mothers. Silence is where aim is found. I set my hand on the rail and chose not to knock again. Music drifted. Laughter answered it. I kept the details and saved my breath for what would come next. Snow creaked as I began down the steps. Lorraine turns from the closed door, the sound of laughter echoing faintly from inside. I walked away from the door, snow crunching under my boots, but halfway down the drive, a houseman jogged after me, breath puffing into the night. "Mrs. Whitmore requests you come in for a moment, so there's no scene at the door," he murmured, eyes lowered. Reluctant permission is still a lock, only painted in softer colors. I followed him back, my resolve hidden behind a calm face. Inside, the air struck warm and perfumed, the opposite of the sharp cold that still clung to my coat. Chandeliers poured light over polished floors, and voices echoed in tones of ease and belonging. Every corner glimmered with silverware and candlelight. Guests in tailored gowns and tuxedos drifted across the room, laughing in clusters that had no gaps for outsiders. I paused on the threshold of the banquet hall, gift still tucked into my pocket, and let my eyes adjust. Beauty has a way of disguising cruelty, and this house was fluent in both. At the long table, cards marked each seat in elegant script. My gaze landed on the place I knew should belong to my daughter, directly across from her husband, a position of honor. But the card did not bear her name. It bore another Isolde. My daughter sat one chair over silent hands, folded in her lap, as though she had been scolded into stillness. The locket box pressed sharp against my coat pocket as my pulse rose. Isolde glided forward, confident, her gown brushing the floor as she claimed the chair that should have been Maribel's. Guests smiled, nodding at her as though the substitution were natural, even admirable. The insult was quiet, but its sting was precise. My daughter erased with a stroke of ink on cardstock. My anger surged, maternal and hot, but I kept my face steady. No one here would see me break. A man brushed past, balancing a glass of champagne, and without glancing, he held it toward me. "Could you take this?" "Thank you," he said, distracted as though I were part of the serving staff. My coat, my posture, my silence. He mistook them for servitude. For a moment, my hand twitched, ready to take it to be invisible for his convenience. Then I held still. He realized his mistake, too late, color creeping up his neck as he turned away without apology. Humiliation burned in me, not just for myself, but for what it meant that I was seen as so far beneath their circle, I could be mistaken for someone hired to pass trays. I steadied my breath, reminding myself that silence, too, is a form of strategy. Every slight was another bead I strung onto a thread I would not forget. Vera swept in, then a vision of practiced grace, all pearls and hauteur. Her smile stretched wide as she reached for Isolde's hands. "Darling, you look radiant tonight," she announced, her voice carrying for all to hear. Heads turned, affirmations followed, and the scene cemented its hierarchy. Maribel sat in shadow, untouched, her smile faint and brittle. She did not rise, nor did anyone rise to greet her. She shrank into her chair while I watched the distance between us feeling wider than the gleaming table itself. I wanted to cross that distance, to put my arm around her shoulders, to tell them all that their performance fooled no one. Instead, I remained still, eyes sharp, every detail stored away. I had learned long ago that sometimes a mother's protection is not in speaking loudly, but in remembering carefully, so truth cannot be rewritten later. The hall rang with laughter silverware chiming against crystal, but none of it touched me. The locket lay heavy in my pocket, a gift I would not yet give. My daughter was being erased in front of me, and I was treated as if I did not belong at all. I pressed my palms together in my lap, outwardly serene, but inside I carved each insult deep. I lowered my gaze to the plate set before me, untouched and cold, when a sharp remark cut through the air. Its cruelty was unmistakable, meant to slice. The remark cut through the laughter like a blade polished for this very moment. It was a guest near the middle of the table, his voice smooth, his smile too casual to be accidental. "Some people," he said, glancing toward me, "never quite understand when they've overstayed their welcome." The laughter around him faltered, then returned in a thinner wave, brittle as glass. Cutlery paused, then resumed with a clatter, meant to disguise discomfort. The chandelier light above seemed sharper, harsher, spotlighting the sentence, as though it were carved into the air for all to see. My breath caught, but I kept my face calm, my hands still in my lap. I let my eyes wander, scanning the faces that lined the table. Vera's smile froze, practiced, as if she had not heard a thing. Isolde allowed herself a smirk, brief and victorious, the satisfaction of someone handed a stage without effort. Dorian sat rigid, his gaze fixed on me, not with embarrassment, but with a watchful curiosity, waiting to see if I would take the bait, if I would dare to upset the script. Other guests shifted uneasily. A woman lowered her gaze to her plate, pretending to study the garnish. A man across the table lifted his wine glass, hiding behind its rim. Their silence spoke clearly. They had chosen sides, and I was alone at this table, though surrounded by company. The first strike was enough, but cruelty rarely stops at once. The same guest chuckled again, leaning back in his chair. Well, he added, "Not everyone here is really family, are they? Some people just can't let go of the old roles." His words drew a ripple of discomfort, then silence, the kind that falls heavy when no one wishes to share in guilt. The air waited for me. I lifted my chin, my voice steady calm, barely above the hum of conversation. "It takes more than blood or invitations to know who truly belongs," I said. My line was short, deliberate, not a challenge but a marker. No one laughed, and no one replied. The silence grew roots, and I let it hold. My eyes found Maribel then. She had not moved, but her hands beneath the tablecloth trembled a tremor I knew as well as my own pulse. Her eyes locked on mine, wide, pleading. She gave the smallest shake of her head, a silent plea that rang louder than any spoken command. Don't make it worse." Her fear pressed against me, and in that moment my pride bent beneath the weight of her desperation. A mother fights not just by speaking, but by knowing when silence itself is a shield. I swallowed the words that burned at the back of my throat. My daughter asked for stillness, and I chose it. I turned the sting of their insult into data, tucking it into the ledger I was quietly keeping. Humiliation became a note disrespect, a record all to be recalled later when the moment demanded it. Around me, conversation resumed. The music swelled once more, and the table moved on, as if nothing had occurred. My plate remained untouched, and I let it be anchoring myself in the calm that outwardly masked the fire within. They thought silence meant defeat, but they did not know how silence can sharpen resolve. A thin draft brushed against my ankles, then a current of winter air sneaking in through the terrace doors. It was a whisper of the outside world, colder than the room's cruelty, yet somehow cleaner. I looked to Maribel's seat and found it empty. Her chair pushed back her presence, slipped away like smoke. My chest tightened. The draft was no accident. My instincts rose alert and urgent. I rose from my chair, folded my napkin, and followed the thread of cold air toward the terrace doors. The moment I stepped away from the table, the faint stream of cold air became a guide. It wound around my ankles, slipped through the fabric of my skirt, and whispered louder than the music behind me. My heels clicked softly on the marble floor as I walked past laughing clusters of guests, their voices dulled by distance but sharpened by contrast. I pushed forward each step, deliberate, my chest tight with worry. The sound of violins and clinking glasses trailed me like a memory I could not trust. At the terrace door, the brass handle was cold even before I turned it. I pushed gently, and the world shifted in an instant. Warmth vanished, replaced by the slap of icy wind against my face. The music collapsed into a muffled hum, swallowed by the roar of the storm outside. My lungs tightened as I inhaled the frozen air, and for a heartbeat I hesitated, fearing what I might find beyond the glass. Then instinct forced my feet forward, carrying me into the snow. There, just steps away, was my daughter. Maribel was crouched low, her arms wrapped tight around herself, her dress a thin barrier against the punishing cold. Snowflakes clung to her hair, her lashes, her lips. She trembled so violently I could hear the fabric of her gown quiver with each shudder. Her eyes were open, but dazed, the kind of stare that no longer sees detail, only blur. Her lips moved without sound, and I felt my stomach drop as I rushed toward her. This was not a tableau or a misunderstanding. This was my child abandoned to freeze while the rest of them danced. I bent to my knees, the cold biting through my stockings, and glanced back toward the door. Through the glass, golden light spilled outward, illuminating silhouettes moving gracefully to music untouched by the storm. I saw Vera lean close to Isolde, their heads tilted in private amusement, while beyond them Dorian's shoulders squared with pride. They were wrapped in warmth, in laughter, in performance. Out here the storm bit into skin, the wind screamed, and my daughter shivered alone in the snow. The contrast carved itself into me, joy inside, cruelty outside. No accident, no oversight, this was choice. Maribel. I whispered, my voice breaking as I reached for her. She blinked slowly, recognition flickering like a fragile flame. Mom. The words slipped out, barely audible, a thread of sound tangled in her chattering teeth. She tried to say more syllables, stumbled out, fragments of fear, fragments of explanation, but each attempt broke apart before forming sense. Her voice was a wounded bird too weak to fly. I gathered her trembling hands into mine, pressed them against my chest for warmth, and leaned close. You don't have to speak. I'm here. Her eyes brimmed with something between apology and terror, and I knew then what silence cost her the weight of fear that bound her tongue. I slipped off my coat and wrapped it around her, tucking the edges tight around her shoulders. The fabric shielded her from the worst of the wind, though her body still quaked beneath it. I held her close, willing my warmth into her. Just as I prepared to lift her, to carry her inside no matter what, they said, a harsh voice cut through the night. I bent lower, trying to pull Maribel up from the snow, her frail weight folding into my arms. Just as I shifted to guide her back toward the light inside, a shadow darkened the doorway. The figure filled the frame, tall and immovable, a silhouette against the warmth I could almost touch. Dorian. His face was carved into composure, but his voice snapped like glass when he spoke. "You don't belong here." The words struck harder than the wind. He didn't raise his tone. He didn't need to. His calmness was its own cruelty. My chest tightened as I pulled Maribel closer, my instinct clawing to protect her, even as the snow soaked through my skirt. He stepped forward, the door cracked open just enough to let the heat slip out, brushing my face like a taunt. Then he said it, each word measured, deliberate, meant to wound me where I lived. "You may have given birth to her, but she belongs to this family now." For a moment, the snow and storm blurred into silence. My throat burned, my breath caught, and it felt as if he had ripped the very core of me away, stripped of motherhood in one sentence, as though decades of sacrifice could be erased with a line of arrogance. I did not answer. My lips trembled, but my silence screamed. Maribel whimpered, curling further into my coat, as though she could disappear from the battle of words. I moved slightly, positioning myself between her and him. The gesture was instinct older than reason. Dorian's eyes narrowed, his smirk thin. "This is why she's weak," he muttered, voice dripping with disdain. "Because of you." His glance at Maribel was not concern, it was accusation, as if my daughter's trembling was my failure, not their cruelty. The snow thickened, blurring the line between us until his hand pressed firmly on the door. In one swift motion, the barrier slammed shut. The sound reverberated through the frame, a violent punctuation that shook the terrace. My heart lurched as the echo carried into the storm, sealing us outside. The warm glow disappeared, replaced by a wall of glass and wood, impenetrable. For a breath, I faltered. Rage surged hot against the cold. I wanted to pound the door to scream every truth I had swallowed. But I looked at Maribel, her face pale and streaked with melting snow, and I knew my strength belonged to her, not to spectacle. I steadied her against me, my hand cupping the back of her head, whispering close to her ear. "Hold on, baby. Hold on." I swallowed every insult, memorizing them like evidence, his sharp tone, his claim that she was no longer mine, the slam of that door. Each detail branded into me not to crush me, but to guide me. My pain stiffened into something sharper, something that would not break under their weight. I held my daughter close, the storm biting at our skin, and silently vowed that his words would not be the final truth. I woke before the alarm, the room gray with winter light, and the radiator clicking like old bones. The night had left a film on my thoughts, thin and brittle. Maribel slept under every blanket I could find, a cup of ginger tea, cooling on the nightstand. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the clouds over Boston crawl like slow ships. There was anger in me, yes, but it moved with a leash. I have learned the leash matters. A mother can burn down a house with one scream. She can also keep her child safe by waiting for the right match. I breathed in through my nose, out through my stubbornness, and counted. I wrote the date at the top of a page in my pocket notebook and underlined it. Last night would not stand alone. It would have company names times proof. I promised my daughter, sleeping beside that window, that I would build a quiet case stone by stone until the weight of it made the truth impossible to ignore. Now. By mid-morning, I had my coat on and the hotel scarf looped twice at my throat. The Whitmore place was awake again by the time I reached the corner delivery trucks idling a florist van nose toward the drive, a valet hut breathing out heat. A younger security guard stood by a small door beside the garage, hands tucked under his elbows. I asked if I could speak with someone about a safety concern. "Last night, my daughter may have fallen near the terrace," I said, steady. He studied my face, then held the door. Inside, a wall of monitors glowed. A woman with a headset greeted me. I explained again, light on details, heavy on mother. She tapped keys and brought up feeds labeled East Patio and Terrace. Timestamps flickered in the corner. I kept my voice low, asking for help, not trouble. "You get farther when you don't look like a storm." They scrubbed back the footage, a river running backward. At 9:12, a shadow tugged Maribel from the curtain. At 9:14, the door did not open. At 9:17, a figure me appeared in a coat too thin for sense palms to the glass. I did not ask for names. I did not raise my voice. I asked if they could email me a clip in case my daughter needed a doctor. The woman nodded, typed, and sent a short file to the address I gave her. While it attached, I lifted my phone and recorded the screen as insurance, the little red dot blinking like a heartbeat. When the email chimed, I thanked them both and asked one more favor, whether a copy could be placed in a folder for the property manager. Digital paper trails matter. The guard held the door for me again, his breath a ghost in the cold. As I stepped out, something clicked into place like a bone set after a break. Proof does not heal everything, but it holds shape when people try to bend it. Back at the hotel desk, I asked if someone could help me save a video. Of course. The clerk said a man with roses inked along his forearms and a name tag that read Ben. At the tiny business center, he showed me how to plug in a loaner flash drive and copy the file. I turned on automatic backup iCloud and Google belts and suspenders, then forwarded the clip to myself and to an old email I use for taxes, plus a trusted friend from church who once worked in IT. Ben suggested a private folder set to view only. We did that too. He never asked what the video showed. People don't erase clouds as easily as they think, he said. I paid him with the only currency he'd take a warm thank you and a promise to mention his patience on the comment card. In the room, I changed my password, wrote the recovery codes in my notebook, and added two-step verification. For good measure, I saved a copy to my aging laptop and labeled it with date and time the way nurses label vials. None of it was dramatic. It was careful, and careful is how mothers win wars they never ask to fight. Upstairs, the room smelled of eucalyptus from the travel balm I rubbed on Maribel's wrists. She sat propped on pillows, color creeping back a knit cap on her head because the chill had sunk deep. I want to show you something, I said, placing the laptop on the tray. The clip was 2 minutes. It was enough. She watched herself vanish behind the curtain, watched the door ignore her, watched my small figure come and stay and fail. Tears came without theatrics and slid into the wool at her chin. "It wasn't you," she whispered hoarse. "It was never you." I took her hand. "We will not argue with anyone tonight," I said. "We will not beg. When they decide to tell on themselves, we'll let them. This is a mirror." She nodded and closed her eyes. I let silence do its work, the kind that doesn't numb but stitches. When she opened them again, there was shame, gratitude, and a thin wire of strength that hadn't broken after all. We ate soup from paper cups and built a list names times the sentence he used at the door, who smiled, who looked away, who looked sorry. I wrote down the florist van, the valet's cough, the hiccup in the music. I set reminders to find receipts and a guest list. I extended our stay, reserved a car, and moved a little money. Maribel slept between the soft pings of confirmations. At the window, I repeated the truth. I would not debate I am her mother. I do not leave her in the snow. I wait for the bell that matters. By late afternoon, my notebook held a spine of facts and the laptop held folders. Some fights invite you to play the fool. This would not be one. I closed the laptop, my fingers on the screen that held their arrogance frozen in time. I reached the law office just after 9, my coat buttoned high against a needle wind. Inside, lemon polish and old paper shared the air. I signed in and said, Lorraine Whitaker. I need to review documents tied to my daughter's inheritance. My voice held. I kept my shoulders level the way I did when Maribel was little, and we crossed park beams, one careful foot, then the next. An assistant led me down a corridor of framed degrees. The carpet hushed our steps. In a glass-walled conference room, a man about my age stood as if good manners were habit. "Corbin Hale," he said. His handshake was dry, respectful. "You called last night," I did. I set my bag down. I need clarity. No fireworks. Facts. He nodded, opened a red rope folder, and slid a stack toward me. Estate amendments trust schedules a transfer consent. Your daughter mentioned recent changes. Confusion, I said, remembering snow on her lashes, and fear. Corbin set a legal pad between us. We'll take this slow. He pointed to the first document. Original will executed 3 years ago. Your daughter is beneficiary of a share and a future interest in the Somerville property. He turned the page. 6 months ago, an amendment. Language narrows her share and adds a clause requiring spousal consent for distributions. I read the sentences carefully, watching for small trouble. Shall had become may. A right had become a favor. Mary Bell's name slipped toward the margin. Who drafted this Whitmore Family Council, he said. Not illegal on its face, but the effect is clear it burdens access. He turned to a trust schedule. The Somerville property now lived inside a new entity where Dorian held controlling interest. A footnote noted streamlined family operations. Another line added transitional oversight by senior members. Senior members meant Mortimer. A gust tapped the window. She didn't agree to this, I said, knowing my daughter's signature when I saw it and when I didn't. Corbin watched my face. Then we look closer, he said. From language to ink. He placed a consent form before me and drew a neat rectangle around the signature line. Compare the loops on the M, he said. Your daughter makes a tiny upward hook before the first downstroke. Here the hook starts late, and see the pressure. It drops near the middle as if the hand slowed to remember the shape. He slid over a magnifier. The date sits too close to the name. She usually leaves space. I held the glass and felt the small, dry heat of anger. I have saved every card Maribel has written me since 2nd grade. I know the rhythm of her hand. This isn't hers, I said. Corbin nodded, at minimum suspicious. We can retain a handwriting expert. More important, we can examine the notary log and witness affidavits. If they weren't present, that matters. I scanned the witness names, old Boston consonants arranged like brick. They thought no one would check. People rarely expect mothers to read footnotes, he said. That's their mistake. The room was quiet enough to hear my pen tap my wedding band. Outside, a siren rose and faded. Inside, the truth grew weight and edges. Back at the hotel, I found Maribel on the edge of the bed with the blanket pulled like a shawl. Some color had returned, but the brittle way she held herself told me the cold had gone deeper. I set the folder on the nightstand and poured tea from the kettle we'd borrowed at the desk. I went to see a lawyer, I said. He isn't flashy. He is thorough. I opened the folder halfway. There are changes to the will, clauses that slow your access. And I lifted the consent form. The signature doesn't look like yours. Her eyes widened in a way that made her look both older and very young. Dorian said it was standard, she whispered, that the family needed to keep things orderly. Orderly can be a cage if someone else holds the lock. I set the paper where she could touch it without committing to read. We won't storm anything. We'll move like water. Water finds the cracks. Her hand shook when she reached. She didn't cry. She inhaled, then nodded. I'm scared, she said. But I'm more tired of being scared. That evening, I called Corbin from the bathroom so the tile would swallow my voice. We'll need certified copies, I said. Video backups are already safe. I did not tell him where. A mother learns to keep some doors locked. We'll request the notary journal tomorrow, he said, quietly. No alarms. If the witnesses are on paper, only that's leverage. If the notary was off-site, that's more. I hung up and returned to the bed. Maribel had braided and unbraided the edge of the blanket into a soft fringe. I sat beside her, our shoulders touching the way they used to on bleachers at school plays. We'll wait, I said. They like a crowd. We'll let them gather one. She traced the rim of the teacup. What if they find out what we're doing? They won't, I said. Not yet. I slipped the folder back into my bag, feeling its rectangular weight, the way a carpenter feels a level settle in the hand, useful, honest. When the time comes, we won't shout. We'll let the paper speak. Outside, sirens braided through traffic and a plow scraped the street. The city kept moving. So did we. I turned off the lamp and let the room shrink to the quiet shape of 2 breaths, finding the same pace. The night did not feel quite as long. I kept the lights low and the heat steady, the way you set a room for a newborn, warm, dim, uncomplicated. Maribel's breaths rattled at first, little shivers skipping through her frame, the mug of chamomile trembling in both hands. I tucked another blanket around her shoulders and let the silence hold. Experience taught me that silence can be shelter. You don't have to fill it with apologies or explanations. You just sit inside it and breathe and wait. Her shivers slowed. The storm at the window softened from fists to fingertips. I didn't ask for a story. I counted the inhales, the lengthening pauses between them. On the TV, the weather crowned another map in blue and called it historic. Without the noise of that house, without the eyes that turned my daughter into a stage, the quiet let her pulse find a human tempo. I added honey to the tea, stirred once set it within reach. "Drink if you can," I said. She nodded and sipped. When her fingers slipped under the blanket and came back up holding the small silver pendant, the past slid into the room like a tide returning. The anchor was scratched, now the edges dulled, but the engraving inside the shank still caught light. "You are never alone." I bought it after a hurricane dragged the bay brown and left us 3 days without power. She'd been 16 and brave in the dark, and then not brave at all. Anchors hold, I told her, because they choose one place and refuse to be moved. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, then again, insistent as a drip. Unknown numbers, then one with his tone all over it, polite, clipped, nearly a threat. "Family image. You're confused. This is unnecessary. The messages stacked like snow on a fence, pretty if you didn't know weight." I slid the phone into airplane mode and set it face down. "We are not answering tonight," I said. "We will document." I took screenshots, saved them to a new folder, let the timestamps do their quiet math. Near midnight, a knock came measured and official. I opened the door to 2 officers in winter coats, their radios murmuring. "Welfare check," the taller one said, voice neutral. A family member reported concern. I stepped back so they could see the blankets, the tea tissues, steam rising from the mug. "You're welcome to come in," I told them. "She's here and safe." They kept to the threshold until I nodded. Maribel lifted her head and answered every question. "Do you have any context?" the tall one asked gently. I opened my laptop and cued the clip the moment at the door, the hand yanking her back the frame, freezing on the tension in her shoulders. I didn't narrate. The video did that for me. He glanced at his partner, then back at us. "We'll note she's safe and oriented," he said. "Here's a case number. If anything changes, call." He set a card down, Rivera and T. Chu. It looked like a key. He left a pamphlet of resources and an advocate number, tools, not miracles, but enough to begin. So, when the latch caught, the room expanded. I tucked the card behind the first notebook page and wrote the digits twice. "He tried to frighten us," I said, "and now we have proof he tried." Maribel pressed the anchor to her lips and let it drop against her sternum. The metal clicked softly, our private bell. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning too many things. "Don't be," I answered. "You are warm, you are fed, you are believed." The words steadied us both. I set out our morning list, call the lieutenant on the card, call Corbin to confirm the next steps on the documents, have the hotel print duplicates of the messages and the clip, request the rest of the camera footage if the vendor agreed, purchase a prepaid phone that Dorian didn't know existed, ask the desk for a late checkout to keep her from the cold while I ran errands. We drew lines around the day like chalk around a fall. "No contact," I said. "No going back there without escort. If he shows up, we call the number before the door even opens." For a while, we just listened to the heater's steady hum, to the pared-back music of a safe room. She told me a little about the terrace, the way the wind seemed to carry the house's laughter out into the dark while she shook alone. I didn't press. Trauma hates a spotlight. It prefers a dim lamp and time. "Tomorrow is for paper," I said. "Tonight is for breath." She tucked the pendant back against her skin and exhaled like someone stepping ashore. I turned off the TV and sat on the edge of the second bed. The heat clicked and whispered. Somewhere in the hallway, an ice machine coughed. I brushed damp hair from her forehead and kissed the spot I used to test for fever. She closed her eyes the way a door closes, not to hide, but to be safe inside. I slid my hand into hers until sleep found her, then eased it free and walked to the window. The storm had gentled into a slow fall, fat flakes that knew they'd land. In the glass, I saw my own face, older and unafraid, a woman done seeking permission to stand where she belongs. The night kept its bargain. No more knocks, no more buzzing. Only breathing, then the small, contented sigh people make when their bodies finally choose rest. I pulled the chair close to the bed and opened my notebook to the first page. At the top, neat and square, I copied the case number. Below it, I wrote our rule again, and under that, a sentence I'd been carrying since the anchor first lay in my palm. Hold. Not forever. Not no matter what. Hold until the ground beneath you is yours. At 8 sharp, I dialed the number Lieutenant Rivera had given me. His voice on the second ring was clear, even tempered, the sound of a man who had already stood in enough storms not to be moved by shouting. I explained who I was and why I was calling, keeping my sentences short and factual. He asked me to come by the precinct mid-morning with whatever I had, no rush in his tone, but no doubt that he would see me. When I hung up, I felt the oddest relief. Dorian's late-night messages had carried heat and pressure. Rivera's words carried weight. I wrote the time of our meeting on the first page of my notebook and tucked the case number from the welfare check behind it like a bookmark. Maribel was still asleep, a calmer breath across the pillow. I left a note coffee in the lobby back soon and slipped out into a city rinsed by cold light. The precinct waiting area was warm and ordinary plastic chairs, a bulletin board with flyers, a Christmas angel made from paper doilies. I checked in, sat, and reviewed my list. Screenshots cataloged by time. A summary of the snow, the slammed door, the sentence that tried to strip the name Mother from me as if it were disposable. When a door opened and Rivera said my name, he didn't squint at me like trouble or pity. He simply gestured me in. His office was small, a desk, a metal file cabinet, a framed photo of a younger officer in dress blues. He listened the way good doctors do, with a quiet that pulls the story straight. "Let's go one piece at a time," he said, and I laid out the phone, the copies, the notes. He took them in with a measured nod after each section, asking only to clarify dates and who stood where. "Show me the forged document," he said gently. I slid the photocopy across Corbin's sticky note still on the corner with a statute reference. Rivera examined the signature line, then the notary stamp. He didn't announce conclusions. He underlined the date with a capped pen, then asked how Maribel usually writes her middle initial. I answered and kept still. When I played the small clip from the exterior camera, Maribel's figure at the curtain, the shape that pulled her back, he leaned closer. Not for spectacle, but for detail angle time code, the way the door pauses before it shuts. "You've done a careful job preserving this," he said. "Keep originals where they are. We'll treat what you've shown as a lead, not a substitute." The distinction was practical and kind. He wrote 2 names on a pad and explained briefly how evidence moves when it moves correctly. The calmness steadied me more than any promise could have. He hesitated, then opened a thin folder and turned it so it faced me. "I can't release documents," he said, "but I can tell you context. A page inside had lines of typed entries, photocopy gray. Some lines were blacked out, but others remained charitable transfers, with round numbers consulting fees that cycled out and back an internal note referring to legacy realignment with initials I recognized. These came from a related inquiry last year," he said. "Different complainant, same family orbit." He tapped a date that predated the Whitmore's grand announcements. "What you're describing doesn't exist in a vacuum. It wasn't a movie reveal. It was steadier than that a puzzle piece slid into place with soft pressure. The ledger entries were not proof of what had happened to my daughter, not yet, but they drew a map that led toward the same house. My throat went tight, not with fear this time, but with a vindication I hadn't allowed myself to expect. I thought of the closed door, the cut remark, the way Maribel's shoulders had folded against the wind. None of it was a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. Rivera closed the folder and met my eyes. He reviewed what steps he could take, now document the welfare check context, open a preliminary matter, tying my materials to the existing file coordinate with the DA intake if new corroboration appeared. No drumroll, no dramatic oath, just a professional spine and a clean list. He tapped my notebook lightly. "Your record-keeping will help," he said. Then he did a small thing I won't forget. He gave a single deliberate nod, the kind men in uniform reserve, when words would cheapen the moment. I understood it the way an old friend understands a squeeze of the hand. It did not promise victory. It conferred standing. My quiet fight had moved from the cold to a place with lights and forms and names that stick. I left the precinct into air that felt less like a blade and more like a lens. On the sidewalk, a delivery truck rumbled past, exhaust clouding, then lifting. I dialed Maribel. She answered on the second ring voice, steadier than it had been in days. I told her where I'd been, what I'd shown, and what I'd seen. "So someone finally believes you," she whispered. "Believes us," I corrected. "We're not alone in this." I could hear the tiny clink of her necklace as she adjusted it, the sound of a small anchor settling against skin. "Stay at the hotel," I said. "No calls to them today. If anyone knocks, you call me in the front desk." She agreed. I stopped at a corner cafe and ordered soup to go, then opened my notebook and wrote the names Rivera had given me on a fresh page. When I stepped back into the winter, the light felt honest enough to see by. I walked out of the precinct, the winter air no longer cutting but clearing, as if making room for what came next. The invitation arrived with winter glitter on thick paper that pretends to be a promise. I turned it twice and said yes. I wasn't going to argue with stationery. I would go see Record. Let the Whitmores build their glass house. Some nights the frost does the cracking. The Boston Athenaeum received us in marble and hush. Tall cases, polished brass, a quiet that expects obedience. I wore black. My only shine was the small anchor at my throat. The hostess scanned the list and seated me by a pillar, present, yet out of frame. Across the room, I saw Maribel bracketed by two sleek women. I didn't know the kind of help that calls itself protection. I did not approach. Distance tonight was a tool. A string quartet softened the chatter. Lights cooled to ceremony. An MC praised the Whitmore legacy, and Dorian stepped forward with Mortimer at his shoulder. The applause was practiced. I watched faces the way a nurse reads monitors. Two wide smiles, narrowed eyes, the lean. That means rumor is oxygen. Then Dorian lifted the microphone and set his tone to silk. "We thank all our supporters," he said, "even those who, when asked for routine documentation, chose to withdraw their pledges." A few heads turned toward me. I didn't move. I took the bank's letter from my bag, confirmation that my funds sat in escrow pending audited transparency, and handed it to board chair. I did not ask for the microphone. I asked for her reading glasses. She read, frowned at escrow, and waved a staffer toward the copier. A donor behind her leaned closer. "Aren't you the woman who funded the literacy van?" she whispered. She showed an email on her phone, a time-stamped pledge to this gala unchanged. "Looks like your support never moved," she said loud enough for the nearby table. What followed wasn't applause, but it wasn't silence either. It was the beginning of doubt. My phone hummed. A text from the archivist I'd met 2 days ago. 2 versions of last quarter's grant report. Later file redirects lines to an administrative vendor. Metadata attached. A screenshot of the file history followed the date sitting like a bruise. I forwarded both to Nora, the journalist in the back row with public radio calm and hound eyes. Her reply was a single dot. We were in the same sentence now. Mortimer flicked 2 fingers and security began to move. I kept my place. The board chair stepped between us with a pleasant smile built for emergencies. "She is my guest," she said, and the sentence gave me a boundary to stand inside. Across the room, Lieutenant Rivera, suit and scarf, no badge, lifted his chin once. The guard stopped. Some evenings, the strongest word is the one no one says. In the corridor outside the reading room, Nora slid an envelope into the chair's hand. Correspondence from last spring, she murmured. Names redacted, but the pattern speaks. Inside were printed emails, polite on the surface, moving programs into a category where funds disappear without leaving the party. The chair read, exhaled, and signaled to a colleague. When people who sign checks begin to whisper, the room leans to listen. The MC tried to refill the room with gratitude. It didn't hold. Donors gathered near the windowed plinth. The chair spoke softly. We will recess for governance review. No one clapped. They didn't need to. I looked for my daughter. The handlers had placed her beside a display case. She looked like a figure in glass until our eyes found each other. I gave her a small nod. I am here, and I am not going anywhere. I returned to my table and took a sip of water I did not want. The anchor at my throat felt heavier, as if memory had weight. Around me, the sound of wealth tried to mimic certainty. It failed. A winter night has a way of making true things louder. Security retreated to the walls. Mortimer's smile hardened. Dorian conferred with a planner, hand over his mouth, like a coach with a bad play. I sat and waited. Patience is not surrender. Sometimes it is the blade you carry openly, because no one thinks it can cut. The board filed toward a side room paneled in wood, so glossy you could see a future in it if you liked yours borrowed. Donors drifted in careful pairs. Rivera took a seat at the far edge, a man enjoying an evening, nothing more. The archivist's last text landed with clean certainty, duplicate file confirmed by checksum. Later file cloned from earlier. Same author ID. I didn't smile. I breathed. I thought of all the little erasures that make a woman vanish a place card, swapped a seat by the pillar. Rumor said sweetly, names on reports can be shifted the same way jewels are moved from one case to another, quietly, under lighting, meant to flatter. But the ledger had edges. Each entry scratched back. I could feel rooms start to notice the scrape. Maribel's handlers edged her toward a doorway, but she touched her necklace once the way she did as a child when she needed courage. My hands stayed folded. She did not need a rescue staged under chandeliers. She needed the structure around her to feel its own fractures. The MC lifted the microphone with a toast that did not rise. Someone adjusted a cable, and then, in that held second, when a room knows it's about to become a story, the sound system snapped, hissed, and opened. Dorian leaned in to whisper, unaware the hall had gone very still. "Mother," he said into a live mic, and every head in the glass house turned. I woke before the sun. The room, washed in the soft gray that comes before a winter morning, decides what kind of day it will be. Maribel slept on the other bed, her breath a steady hush. The anchor necklace lay against her throat like a small pledge kept through storms. I made coffee in the slow hotel machine, then sat at the window and let myself feel the weight of quiet. For years, I had chosen silence to keep the peace. Today, I chose silence for strength. When she stirred, I took her hand and said, "We walk in truth, no matter the cost." By 9, the Whitmore estate was staged for respectability, hedges rhymed with frost, a drive salted for cameras, a lectern on the portico. Board members filed past us with the careful faces of people who know a tide is turning and would like to be found on the right shore. Lieutenant Rivera stood a few steps back, coat open, a legal pad tucked under his arm. He gave me a brief look that said, "Proceed." The chair cleared her throat and began. She did not warm the gathering with pleasantries. She warmed it with fact. An emergency review was conducted overnight, she said. Independent examiners verified duplicate ledgers and inconsistent signatures on grant and inheritance documents. Slides appeared on a portable screen, dates, edits, a side-by-side of a true signature, and a practiced imitation that almost passed until you saw the hesitation in the loop of the B. A low murmur moved through the donors like wind guttering through a chapel. Dorian stepped forward, palms up, wearing that reasonable tone like cologne. "Clerical misunderstandings," he said. "My mother and I were consolidating records." He tried a small smile toward the cameras. "And as for my wife's mother, she has been under strain." He did not finish. The next slide was the edit log from the grant report, an account reassigned to a shell vendor at 11:19 p.m., 3 weeks after a pledge had been announced. The archivist's note scrolled beneath. The crowd exhaled in one sharp breath. Questions broke like ice. Nora lifted her phone and went live. "This is the Whitmore Foundation's emergency briefing," she said softly, the way you narrate a thing already recording itself. Rivera's pen ticked once against his pad. The chair announced a suspension of Whitmore control pending a full audit and referred matters to city and state authorities. Someone asked about my alleged withdrawn gift. She answered, "The funds remain in escrow with documentation. Our misstatement is retracted." Maribel stood beside me, small but upright. Her voice did not carry far, but it carried clean. "I was silenced," she said, "but I am not invisible." The microphones leaned hungry. She did not give them more. She did not have to. I stepped forward only to add, "Truth needs no volume, only persistence." We did not look at Dorian. We did not need to. The wind moved across the lawn, lifting a shimmer of frost from the grass. Somewhere inside, a clock struck the hour and kept going. The press turned questions flaring and falling. Mortimer tried a sentence and lost it halfway through. Dorian reached for the lectern. Security reached for Dorian. The chair's gavel borrowed symbolic tapped wood. "We will answer through process." She said, "not spectacle." Rivera nodded once the same nod he had given me at the precinct. "We will move this forward." Nora ended her feed with a final frame on the slide that mattered the forged line sitting beside the true. When the crowd thinned, we stepped down the portico together. The sun found its way through a seam in the clouds, small and stubborn. On the lawn, patches of white gave way to blades of winter green. I thought of the first night in Boston, the door that would not open, the laughter on the other side of glass, the cold that took my daughter's breath. I thought of the necklace against her palm last night and the way she had held the word anchor as if it were not metal, but meaning. We had weathered the storm and learned its shape. A donor approached the one who had recognized my name from a long-ago literacy project. "I'm sorry," she said, and the apology seemed to travel backward, rinsing small stains off old days I had learned to live with. "Thank you for staying the course." I told her it is easier to stand straight when you are holding someone up. Maribel smiled, and the smile was not for cameras. We walked to the edge of the drive where the frost had softened into wet gravel. Reporters called after us. The board returned to their process. The estate stood with all its careful lines as if a blueprint were more permanent than a promise. My phone chimed with a message from Corbin Filings Initiated. "Hold steady." I texted back a single word, "steady." At the gate, I paused. "Do you want to speak more?" I asked. Maribel shook her head. "Not today," she said. "Today I want soup and blankets that smell like us." I laughed a small sound that belonged in kitchens, not courtyards. "Then that is what we will do." We turned toward the street, toward the city that had been cold and would be kind again. The air tasted like metal and new beginnings. I once found her shivering in the snow while others gathered by a fire and called it love. Today she walked beside me in her own warmth. We did not cheer. We did not bow. We kept walking onward. The day did not end with applause, but with the sound of our steps together on thawing ground, proof that winter always breaks for dawn. Looking back, I learned that silence isn't surrender. It's strategy when paired with truth. I'm a mother, not a martyr. I kept records, asked for help, and stood firm. If someone tries to erase you, document set boundaries and find steady allies. We can protect family without losing ourselves. What would you have done in my place? Have you faced a closed door and pushed back with dignity? If this story touched you, comment 1 or share where you're watching from. If it missed the mark, tell me why. And if you want more true healing stories, please subscribe to the channel. Your voice matters here. Add your experience below so others can learn, heal, and stand taller together. Thank you.